Good morning, everyone. Before doing a recap of yesterday's afternoon's workshops on the 4 priorities, I'd like first of all to thank you all very sincerely for your presence, for your commitment, for your creativity, and for your positive spirit in collaboration. I have no doubt that the national engagement mobilization strategy is in good hands if each and every one of you agrees to be ambassadors in our next phase of our collective efforts. Now, when we talk about builders, I'd like to thank you about your patience finding your way in the maze of this building. When we reserved the hotel, it was the Crown Plaza, and it was fully functional. We didn't expect to have a building that was under construction. But I think the Delta team really welcomed us warmly, and I thank you for your patience trying to find your way to the second floor and penthouse and other locations.
At the beginning of the day, to acknowledge the many colleagues and organizations that have contributed to the success of the summit. And what I'd like to do is to identify some of these collaborators, and I'd ask you to rise and remain standing. Some of you would be popping up several times otherwise until we get everyone who has been involved in a significant way acknowledged, and then we can give one big round of applause. So could I ask our 4 co-hosts and all of the staff of their organizations who have contributed in any large or small way to please stand to be recognized, please? So our 4 co-host organizations. And all of the staff. I see you sitting over there, Amanda and others. Get up and get your recognition. You deserve it. I'd also like, please remain standing because I'm going to add many more collaborators. If it takes a village to raise a child, it's taken an army to put on this summit. So colleagues who have hosted a provincial or territorial community conversation or a meeting in 209 or 210, a number of you are here in the room. Please rise, and we want to thank you for helping us to get to this point at the summit. I'd also like to ask our 12 co-leads, our lead facilitators, and our brave themers who have worked in the 4 priority rooms to stand with us. And we have a number of speakers who are with us still here today who are both participants and contributors. I'd like to recognize you as well. Our colleagues from Agora, from OTF, and McConnell who funded our initiative, and also our corporate sponsors who have provided their support. The members of our National Engagement Strategy Advisory Committee who have spearheaded the effort overall, and all those colleagues in the room who have funded the presence of a young leader, which has added so tremendously to our efforts. Could I ask you now to please join in giving all of them a round of applause and our greatest thanks. And last but not least, I do want to give a shout out to those who are often forgotten, but certainly who have allowed me and others on the team to sleep at night. And that would include our technical director, Dave Gilmore, and all of the team who have made sure that all of the audio-visual and the simultaneous interpretation and everything else has worked. And as well as the team from CoVision, Laura Gramling and Joss Kaufman and all the team, they've gone above and beyond the call of duty to ensure that we could accelerate and enhance our process through their facilitation. So my thanks to both of you and all your team. I'd just like to say in my defense of what will follow, that my initial grandiose plan was to have detailed one-page summaries of each of the 4 priority working areas that would be drafted by an entire team late on Tuesday evening, translated while burning the midnight oil, copy-edited very carefully, and formatted in both official languages, and then slipped under your doors at multiple hotels throughout the National Capital Area before 6 a.m. Not surprisingly, and not for the first time, my wondrous plan got vetoed. And instead, the wondrous plan became, thanks to our fearless leader, Marcel, Michel, you could just stand up and do a brilliant bilingual 10-minute summary of everything we heard in those rooms for everyone to hear the following morning. It didn't sound like such a bad solution at the time, but after a lovely evening at the National Gallery last night and a glass or two of wine and wonderful food and great conversation, Suddenly, at 11 o'clock last night, the idea of being able to summarize 500 participants' brilliant ideas over the richness of 2 full sessions and also defining a path forward seemed a very daunting task. So I'm going to put my ego aside this morning and certainly will not be giving you analytic prowess here in terms of a summary, and have agreed with the lead facilitators that I would limit myself simply to a high-level sense of what the key outcomes were from yesterday and a little bit of a teaser about where you may be going next. So all 4 groups reported a very high level of engagement and tremendous positive energy in their respective rooms. Those working on the financing priority were very quickly seized with the realization of the complexity of the topic with which they were wrestling. But as is in the traditional nature, I think, of the sector, this did not stop them, however, from taking the already daunting task of trying to tackle 4 different areas of focus: grants and contributions, philanthropy, earned income, and financial literacy, and adding a 5th, social finance, for independent consideration. Despite the challenge of trying to run through 5 different areas, they were brilliant in their assessments, and the day ended with a ranking exercise in which participants in the financing group were invited to identify their top 2 outcomes sought in each of the 4 areas originally identified. So I just want to give you a quick sense of what these top 8 outcomes were, and they will be in the final session later this morning, focusing on securing commitments to action from all participants on 1 or more of these outcomes. So around G's and C's, the top 2 outcomes that were ranked: first, multi-year funding based on policy outcomes, including all cost with standard applications on review. And the second was around standardized reporting systems on how the money is spent. For the second area, around earned income, the top outcomes were better CRA regulations that support social enterprise or social finance, and more contact among sectors on social finance issues. In philanthropy, the top outcomes were improved perception by the public of charities and nonprofits, including our impact and contributions. And second, a very short-term but very important measure, the stretch tax credit for charitable giving and the capital gains exemption for gifts of real estate in Budget 2012. And I think we would all be delighted to see both of these measures in the next budget. And finally, around financial literacy, an emphasis on more resources for increased financial literacy, and also more learning about the nonprofit sector in business, in schools, in the civil service, in CA programs, and in a number of other places. So clearly they have their work cut out for them and lots of actions to describe. The narrative group had what we might define as a very spirited conversation, and they will further debate in their 3rd breakout session later this morning the best way to proceed in another good tradition of the sector. There was excellent discussion around the need for a tactical, sector-wide response to the immediate and persistent requests by media, politicians, and the public to explain, possibly through Q&As or other means, such challenging and often complex issues as compensation levels for sector employees and what are the quote-unquote appropriate administrative costs and fundraising costs for the sector. At the same time, though, there was also a strong recognition of the need for an aspirational framing of the sector's impact and for a compelling shared description of the work of the sector as a whole. In essence, I think they were recognizing the need for a self-defining narrative for our contributions to communities, to quality of life, and to economic prosperity that can be embraced by all and easily communicated. So in the final session today, participants in the narrative or in the impact room will be invited to identify actions to address the issues that have been dogging us in the immediate term in terms of the day-to-day response required, but also be looking at the big picture messages that need to be refined and consistently conveyed to reclaim our sector narrative. Le groupe sur le bénévolat a misé sur
the volunteer group concentrated and discussed the primary importance of engaging youth, not as an independent strategy, but rather as a component. This group also considered the possibility that the concept of volunteer may have to be revamped based on greater emphasis on citizenship and committed citizenship. This reflection led to a recognition that non-profit organizations were competing with non-organizational, for example, the Occupy Ottawa group or Occupy in other cities, regarding the engagement and the attention of citizens. So the conversation ended up with a consideration as to how to redefine the concept of volunteerism to attain the objective of citizen engagement. In particular, the group considered the concept that volunteer is for older people, requiring long-term commitment, that volunteers are not accountable, and the role of volunteers and compensated staff is not interchangeable. The last session today will have as a goal to identify actions to be taken so as to be able to attain their goals in the future.
Did I skip over the HR, or did I give you that? I think I did skip over the HR. Just let me go back, or Marlene won't forgive me as the lead facilitator in that room. So for the group in the HR room, colleagues who were focused on the attraction and retention of highly qualified staff considered and renamed 5 key issues that they felt needed to be addressed. One was around getting the right mix of people. Another was getting the right mix of skills. The third was becoming an employer of choice. The fourth is one that I hold dear, and that's really making people a priority, not just talking about making people a priority. And the fifth is keeping our treasures. In the final session, the HR group will be focused on identifying 2 or 3 sector-wide strategies for each of the 5 issues identified and determining who is best placed to lead and commit to action in those areas. As all 4 priority areas continue their exhilarating, and I often call it exhilarating and exhausting to collaborate. So the exhilarating and exhausting trek from identification of issues to definitions of outcomes sought to commitments to action that must be taken to achieve these outcomes. I sensed in all 4 rooms yesterday and again last night over the dinner a healthy mix of angst, excitement, hope, and urgency regarding where we need to go next. And while I'll readily admit that I was one of the first to be pushing colleagues to define clearly and concretely a very short list of actions that could be moved on quickly and effectively in the next 12 months, I think in reality what we will see emerge from this process is in fact in each room a few actions for which there is clear momentum, clear direction, and a critical mass of sector leaders willing to move forward on these actions. And we will have other issues for which further work will be needed to better delineate what is required, what is feasible, and what should be tackled in which order to achieve the outcomes we desire. Last night over dinner, as I spoke with colleagues, many noted that it's not enough to say that this or that needs to be done, but also that we need to identify who is poised or best positioned to do the it that we have collectively identified as the actions to be taken. The important thing to remember as we head into this last working group session at 10:30 today is that the who is not someone else. These are not Imagine Canada official words, but mine. It's not the mystical national organization with seemingly infinite resources, or conversely, some nostalgic version of grassroots movement with limited capacity that can organically and magically bring about the changes that we desire. That who is each and every one of us, as individuals, as organizations, and as a collective pulling in the same direction. So the question at the end of the day is not who can do this for us, but now that we've defined what needs to be done, how can each of us contribute in whatever way, large or small, to moving the yardsticks, to redefining the parameters of the discussion, to taking the risks that we need to take to achieve those new collaborations and discoveries, to have the courage to stand up and be counted, and to do what we all should be doing if, in Nathaniel's words, we were doing what we would do if we knew we could not fail. In 2009 and 2010, when colleagues from across the country came together to validate the drivers of change that were part of the draft framework for action, they didn't do so with time to spare, but rather with a sense of urgency, that we had to tackle these issues head on with confidence and long-term commitment, because if we did not do so, others would do it for us or to us. And that imperative has not changed. We can define the future we want. We must define the future we want. For the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And so I look forward to the outcome of your working group sessions today, where you will both confirm the path forward and commit to the difference that you will make, not just to making the sector stronger for the sector's sake, but more importantly, to ensure that each and every one of us contributes actively and constructively to the leadership role that we know the sector can and must play to invent the Canada we want, one that's inclusive, vibrant, resilient, just, creative, prosperous, caring, and daring. Merci beaucoup.